Welcome back to the Policy Viz podcast. I'm your host, Jon Schwabish. This episode marks the final episode of season 9 of the show. Yes, 9 years of doing this podcast. I know everyone has a podcast now, but when I started this show 9 years ago, I didn't really think I'd be doing it for this long, but I'm excited to have so many great guests join me on the show, and this week is no different. I'm so excited to be joined by my friend Nigel Holmes. Nigel has a new great book out, Joyful Infographics. If you want a really actually joyful introduction and discussion of data visualization, I can't recommend this book highly enough. There are so many little great treats, little Easter eggs in the book, which Nigel and I talk about in this conversation. I think you're just going to really love this book. I think if you are someone who's been working with data and creating visualizations, this book will help you move to the next level, to think about how to engage your audience and how to bring that joy into your content. So Nigel and I talk about his writing process. We talk about different aspects of the book. We talk about how he designs the books. Lots of different things for us to discuss. And so I hope you'll enjoy this season finale of the Policy Viz podcast with Nigel Holmes. And here is our conversation. Hey, Nigel. Great to see you wearing blue as always.
Hi, John.
Both got our blue on today.
Yes.
We're good to go.
Yeah.
Great to see you. It's been since before the pandemic, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked since then. As I recall, I think early on in the pandemic, you did one of the. I was doing like that little video series.
Yes.
Urban, right? So that might have been the last time we sat down and
chatted.
So
yeah.
Well, great to see you. Yep. New book out, Joyful Infographics. I've got it right here.
Right.
Folks listening can't see this, but I've got it's the yellow blue cover with I've got my yellow Post-it notes on the side here.
Right.
There's some great pieces in here, and I want to try to get to as much as we can. And I wanted to start just with joy because it's about joy.
Yep.
As far as I know, you're a pretty joyful guy.
Yep.
So I want to just get a sense from you of how you approach your work through this sense of joy and how you bring that into your work and kind of maybe even what inspires you to bring that joyful approach into your work.
Yeah. Well, the word joy actually was 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒. He's the editor. His title was Joyful Infographics, which I loved. I guess I am optimistic and happy, and I love working, and when I get excited when somebody calls and says, would you do this? And I'll say yes before they've said what it is, because some subjects are not so joyful. And that's actually something that we maybe should talk about in a little bit. Because I'm not trying to make people tell jokes with data or anything like that. It's an approach more than anything. And I think it shows in the work. I think I can look at somebody else's work, and say, they enjoyed doing this. You can, and I think that's what, so it's enjoy as well as joy. I just thought of that. Isn't that clever? I don't know. I want people to feel happy. I want them to be happy when they're doing the work. And I do understand that it's not always possible. So I'm not trying to be dogmatic here, but you can still be joyful and happy even with difficult subjects. And the way to that is to try to be friendly to the reader or the user, or who, somebody who's looking on the web or somebody who is reading a page. I'm actually very much rooted in the static page and in static websites, by the way. But that's just because that's the way I grew up, and I haven't really changed very much. Magazines have been in my life all my life from schools on, and I always tried to have a sense of humor, which comes, I think, from a lot of English influences, some of which are
Mhm.
in the book, and some of some of them are just silly things like Edward Lear and
Mhm.
Monty Python and things like that. And I understand that that's not a particularly good example to use when you're trying to tell people the truth about data. But
Mhm.
but you can have silly. Everybody has silly thoughts,
Right. Right.
and I think the thing is to kind of train them into what part of this is silly enough that I can use it, or is not so silly that or is too silly, so I should get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway, I'm rambling.
No.
But
So how do you think about those more serious topics? I mean, we could take I don't know, relative poverty rates as an example, right? So how do you approach
well,
a story on poverty through a joyful lens while giving it the seriousness that it deserves?
well, I think my approach is twofold. What
Mm-hmm.
One is, if I can find a way to use humor, then I
Mm-hmm.
will. But
Right.
if it's completely inappropriate, then the second approach is, I want to make it as understandable, as friendly, as approachable, as
Yeah.
unlike homework as possible, so that
Right.
things are clear. It's clarity, it's explanation, it's something that people can look at and say, "Oh, now I see it." And
Right.
so it's a smile of recognition more than
Mm-hmm.
of, "Oh, ha ha, that's funny."
Right. Right.
Yeah, let's
It's joy and understanding rather than joy
yeah.
of laughter.
Yeah,
Right.
right, right.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
there's
Right.
nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with laughter,
No.
uh,
Right.
and also some seemingly serious subjects, like I don't know. I've been fairly rude to uh, politicians in the past, and 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 Time at when I was at Time,
Yeah.
and um, the editors liked it, but the representatives of the uh, of the politicians didn't like it at all,
Right.
and I did some pretty silly drawings of George Bush and of Reagan and of
Mm-hmm.
Carter, actually. So you can tell
Yeah.
listeners how old I am here. Um, I don't know any other president, um, but I mean, the thing is, they did some things that should have been brought to the reader's attention. And
Mm-hmm.
if it was a budget that wasn't good, or it was something that they said that was wrong, or they were out of touch, I'm going to point that out. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, that brought a hailstone down on me as well, or a hail of
Yeah.
stones, or however you said, from people who said, "No, if you're an information designer, you shouldn't mess about like that."
Right.
And and I would just my comeback was, "Hey, you don't know my audience. My
Mm.
audience at that time, general purpose, reading a magazine, a weekly magazine that they were going to throw away. This was not going into the archive. Well, it went into my archive, but
Right. Right.
but
Yeah.
I mean, this is a comment, and I saw nothing wrong with making comments, and I
Mm-hmm.
still don't. I don't. I think we should tell the truth,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm on the fence about uh, both sidesism. No.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Uh,
No. Well. So I wonder then. Do you think that there is kind of an axis or a spectrum here of going from pure opinion to objective
yeah,
fact? Maybe that's not the right spectrum to think of,
no,
but I think a lot of people are making arguments with their data,
yeah,
and maybe a lot of people get stuck in the trap of let's try to be as objective as
yes,
possible, even though we're trying to make an argument.
yes,
And do you think people sort of mix those two or confuse those
yes,
pieces? Yeah.
absolutely, they do. And I can make that clear. And in a sense, I think it's dishonest if you don't make it clear. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you just say, well, this is going to sound rude, but if you say to a reader, I trust you to understand what I'm saying in this data, and it's really bad, none of
Mm-hmm.
that is spoken. You
Right.
just give them it. A lot of people won't get that,
Mm-hmm.
but others will, and they'll say, wait a minute, that's also bad because
Right.
you haven't pointed out the salient parts of the data. And I
Mm-hmm.
really think we should do that. I think there should be more kind of labels that say, wow, look at this bit.
Right.
Here's a line that goes up, or like this goes up,
Yep.
and it goes up and then suddenly goes down. What? Wait a minute, what happened here? Why don't we
Right.
say something and
Right.
kind of mess with the purity of the data by
Mm-hmm.
helping people to understand it? And I think
Yeah.
that's a friendly thing to do. I think that's a joyful thing to do.
And when you talk about and think about your audience, we can go back
Yeah.
to time. Um, when you were at time, did you or did folks there talk to readers? Like, how did you
Yeah.
figure out that audience, like that they are, they're picking up the magazine, they read it kind of quickly, and then they move on to the next
Right.
magazine. Like, so I think, because I think this is a problem a lot of people have, which is they want to think about their audience, but they don't know exactly who their
Yes.
audience is. They don't know how to get that
Yep.
feedback.
Yep.
So what was your approach early on and even today?
Well, early on was easy. They wrote letters. They wrote
Yeah.
tons of letters, and they
Oh, yeah.
loved what I was doing. So
Mm.
that I was able to stand up in front of, uh, I'm going to call him Mr. Tufty because I don't know whether he is a professor anymore, and say, hey, you get the wrong idea about me.
Right.
I know who I'm talking to, and they love it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
he could easily have come back if he'd bothered to and say, but they shouldn't love it,
Right.
because it's not pure.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know. I don't know why
Well,
40 years.
pure from his
Yes,
perspective,
yes.
right? From his
Yeah, yeah,
perspective that is built on his opinion,
yeah,
really. Yeah.
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 And I mean, I think I got his books. I got all his books. They're beautifully
Mm-hmm.
produced. They're
Right.
little works of art, and
Yeah.
and they have a lot of good stuff in it, and a lot of the things I actually agree with. And
Mm-hmm.
I was at a thing for the Cooper Hewitt about maps. They did a
Mm-hmm.
whole exhibition about maps. And his wife, Dorothea, was there, and she teaches drawing, and she was on the same panel as I was. And I got on really well with her. And I thought, at last, she's going to go home and say, hey, Eddie, what? This guy's okay,
Right. Right.
And I never heard anything. I never heard anything
No.
from it. No.
No. I do like the idea of her calling him Eddie, though.
Yeah.
That brings me joy right there, just to have that.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so I want to talk about the production of your book
yes.
in a moment, but I want to read a section here, a
Yeah.
sentence that you wrote,
Hmm.
because I think there are many amazing nuggets in this book, but this one, as I thought about prepping for our conversation, I thought this one is useful for a lot of people. So early on in the book, you say, as long as designers don't overload infographics with so much extraneous stuff that the meaning of the story is obscured, we shouldn't be afraid to add a feeling of approachability and humanity, even humor where appropriate, to our graphic toolboxes, which is something you've already talked about um,
Yep.
here. But I want to know, how would you recommend someone who is an information designer think about that sweet spot between stuff
Yep.
and too much
Yeah.
stuff?
Well, first, a mea culpa. I mean, academic people could have chosen much worse examples than the ones that you see all over the place that I did, where as I rose up through time, I became the person who was in charge of saying whether or not it should be printed, and I gave myself too much liberty.
Mm.
And there are some really overloaded graphics that I did that I'm ashamed of, which actually are in the book. which I've got to put a big cross through. Okay, so how would I advise somebody is two things to think about: what the subject is and who the audience is. Now that sounds very, and we've talked about audience, and it's difficult to know who the audience is, but you have, if you don't know, I think you have to say, I'm making it for this audience. You're doing it yourself. And have I made enough of a graphic point with, let's say, the illustrations or whatever, photographs or the visual stuff that is not the data? Have I made enough of a point of that without obscuring the data? And I always say that if I get the smile or the recognition from the image that people see, and somebody doesn't immediately say, oh, that looks interesting, now what's the data? If they don't say that, then it's a failure. It's too overloaded. It's, oh God, I can't get through this. This is, the guy's just, showing off, which I did. I mean, I trained as an illustrator. I have no knowledge of statistics or anything like that.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing, because it keeps you ordinary. It keeps you like the readers. So think, who is reading this? If it's an academic paper you're doing, you're not going to mess about at all. And I wouldn't. And I've done stuff like that.
Yeah.
If the subject is about death or AIDS, or, well, you see, that ages me now straight away. But I mean, or some sort of infirmity, I would never touch anything that got in the way of the information. I'd make it straightforward, but I would come back and say, but I wouldn't just put everything in, say, oh, I haven't got a space for an illustration here, so I'd better put every data point in. No, I would still make it clear. And if the line went up like this, gradually up, I might say, I'm taking this point and making a straight line. And because there's not enough difference in the ups and downs of the line. I'm talking about a line graph here, but it could be bar chart or anything. There's not enough difference for the audience that I've decided it is for, which is, in my case, the general reading public who just wants to look at the information, get it, and move on. Then that's it. I mean, so what's the subject? How far can you go with it? And then who's actually reading it? Who is going to look at this?
And do you? So there's the stuff that you've mentioned that's sort of that has too much in it, and then there's all the way the other side, which is take that line chart. It's just a line, and it doesn't even tell you what the graph is about. It just describes the data, right? It says, worldwide deaths 1950 to 2022, and that's it. So in the middle somewhere, there is something that helps draw people into that graphic. And so how do you think about, you still have maybe it's not death, maybe it's not, super serious topic, but it's how do you sort of balance I want to add something here that engages people. I don't want to make it look cartoony. I don't want to make it look, clip arty, but I want to do something.
Well, one thing is to say, is this actually worth a chart? Maybe I can make my point with a well-crafted phrase here. And this was where this was wonderful at time, that I could go back to the writers there and I could do two things with them. I could say, you know what? The wretched old art department here, the art director has said he wants a chart on this page. I don't think it's worth it. which thrills the writer, of course, because they've got more space.
More
But
space,
but
right?
what would you say? What would you say
Yeah.
about this particular set of numbers? And on the other hand, I hate it when it's all words about numbers and you really wish there was a chart there.
Yeah.
That's an
Right.
aside. But the other thing that I found with writers was that I'd say to them, well, so what's this actually like? What is happening here?
Mm.
Is this the tail wagging the dog or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And if they said yes, I'd say, well, um, can we have tail wagging a tail wagging a dog here, or is that over
Yeah.
the top? And then there'd be a discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing I want to say actually is that it's not always worth having a chart. And and
Yeah.
and also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with a very small chart.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, I mean, some things don't have to be very big, especially the example that I gave of this point straight to this point. Forget all the middle bit. You know, 2000 here, 2022, 23 here, straight
Mm-hmm.
line. That's how much
Right.
it went up.
Yeah.
And maybe,
And that's all you
and
need.
that's all you need. And
Yeah.
or maybe it is a big number that
Mm-hmm.
says it's X% growth, and it's
Mm-hmm.
you know yeah
Right. Right. Yeah, I was last week I was at the Tableau
yes I
conference,
know
and big numbers are a big
yeah.
theme in dashboarding. And so I was just going to ask, like, how do you feel about just using those big numbers? And do you, or have you, I guess, played around with how those big numbers look? So 2.3%, you could put that in, a Times New Roman black font,
Yes.
and it can just kind of sit there.
Yep.
Or it could be more of what I would call like the Nigel Holmes
Yeah.
approach, which is more of like an illustration with maybe, a top hat on the three or something like
Yeah.
that. So how, when you design those big numbers or those really small charts, do you sometimes try to make them a little bit more fun, a little bit more joyful?
No.
Mm.
Often I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I will just say, um, for the reader and for the pacing of whatever it's appearing in, that sometimes you can just have something that is really rather simple,
Mm-hmm.
clear,
Right.
but simple, and then
Yeah.
the next page you get something that's bigger and more developed, and I mean that comes from my magazine training in England before I came here, where the pacing of the pages was such that um, there weren't rules exactly, but you didn't blast every page with a big bleed off
Yeah.
thing. You paced it so that some pages were largely text, or some pages had
Mm.
just a little thing in them, and that little thing could be a chart. Yeah.
That concept of pacing is really interesting. Do you think the pacing in that hard copy magazine versus reading something online, that the pacing is inherently different?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Which,
And I'm not sure that I've mastered the pacing of
yeah.
websites. I work with my son on websites on my own, and he has very different opinions. Not well,
Mm.
no, he doesn't have very different opinions, but he says, "Why don't we try this? Because you can do this." That
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a big whoa, wait a minute, and has led to, I think, a lot of problems in information graphics and data visualization. Is that
Mm-hmm.
new program, not that new now, which will produce you something at the touch of a button almost when you just
Yeah.
load the data in, and you say, wow, oh, okay, well, yeah, that looks good, but you haven't done that. and
Yes.
and and I that is a bug for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is I mean, it enables more people to do it. It's the same
Right.
with PowerPoint, and
Mm-hmm.
for goodness sake, what's going to happen with AI? I mean, are we out of a job here? Or I, I,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's actually quite scary.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I mean,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna get off into a tangent and not be able to come
I
back.
know.
And
I know. Yeah.
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 And the AI will shut us down. So the other thing I want to talk
Yeah.
about was, and you've already, I think folks listening to this can already get this sense, but the way you approach your work is very much from an empathetic perspective.
Yes.
So you approach your work not just with empathy for the topic you're working on, but also very clearly for the
Yeah.
audience. And one of the things that many folks talk about is being able to help people see themselves in the data.
Yes.
And so if you take that empathetic approach, how do you think about that when you are creating graphics and you're saying, I want people to see themselves because it's going to be
Yeah.
helpful and they're going to embrace it more. But you're doing so in a way that's respectful and that they'll embrace. And so how do you sort of, the
Mhm.
very amorphous
Yeah.
question
No.
here,
No.
but like how do you approach that whole concept of empathy throughout the whole work
Yeah.
process?
It's something that I started to learn at time was and before that, actually, at the Radio Times in England, where I worked for 10 years before going to Time. The um, the difficulty is putting people into graphics.
Mm-hmm.
And my natural default to begin with was white man
Mm-hmm.
doing something, postal costs, white postman running up a
Mm-hmm.
thing holding a letter. And the longer I was there, the more my friendly readers started to say, "Wait a minute,
Mm.
there are other people," and
Right.
and I would say stupidly now I realize at the time, well, this is just a graphic. This is just showing that a human is involved,
Right.
and of course that's a wrong approach. I mean, it became difficult when I would use the Otto Neurath approach of little figures lined up. And if they were black, people began to say, just as I was leaving Time, which is early 90s, are these black people?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, no. I mean,
Right. They're just
it's
representations of
representations
countless people.
of people.
Right.
And and it's actually very difficult. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of silly answer is never to use black people or white people, but use blue people because there aren't any
Right.
blue
Right.
people. And of
Yeah.
course, I like
Right.
blue. So,
Right.
people would say, oh, well, he's using blue people because he likes blue people,
Right.
And
Right.
then is it a man or a woman? And I've
Mm-hmm.
been in discussions about the signs that you put on toilets, and
Mm-hmm.
some men wear a thing that looks like a skirt, and in
Mm-hmm.
Scotland they do all the time, and
Sure.
and some women wear pants. So is it
Right.
right to show that? Is that old fashioned, or what is that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this a lot actually,
Yeah.
in terms of symbols. And so in order to be able to see yourself in it, I don't think I've actually found the right way to do it. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
I go to the gym in the morning. I walk on the treadmill, and
Mm-hmm.
I watch CNN or something like that. And there are lots of ads. This is at 6 o'clock in the morning. Every ad has a black person, a Hispanic person, a woman, and a man.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is about, whether it is
Right.
about shopping or jewelry or cleaning or gardening, what and they are trying to bend over backwards to be inclusive. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that is inclusive. I
Mm.
in a funny way, every person in that gym watching those shows is happens actually to be a white person. Now,
Mm-hmm.
is that an argument that they are they need to be educated. This is a huge question.
Yeah, and very
And
difficult, because
very
how do you
difficult. Yeah,
represent the entire experience and
right,
intersectionality of human
right.
beings?
So it again comes down to those two things. It comes down to the subject matter and
Mm-hmm.
the audience, who you think your audience is.
Mm.
And I I don't know. I mean, I I'm literally at a loss for words here.
Yeah, no,
I do not know how to.
no, I agree with
Yeah.
you, and we can talk about certain categories of race,
Yes.
and the categories of race that we tend to talk about tend to be very
Yep.
limited, anyways.
Yes.
Gender, we
Yep.
tend to talk about male and
Yep. Hmm.
man and
Yep.
woman, but we know that that's
Yes.
limiting. So, how do you, in an information visualization world
Yes.
where we are trying to, in many ways, summarize
Yes.
experiences and summarize data, how do we represent that
Right.
diversity? Which
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's yeah. I don't think there's an answer.
Yeah.
It's something clearly that folks are thinking about. You've been thinking about. So, if you were to go back now to time,
Yes.
to those early
Yes.
graphics, would you? So I'm gonna give you this scenario, because I'm gonna limit the scenario,
Okay.
because otherwise we'll never stop talking about
Right.
this, because I don't
Yeah.
think. So we're gonna give you the option to go back and review all of your
Yes.
graphics. You're not going to be able to fundamentally change the graphic
Right.
itself, but the representation of the
Right.
people. Would you move away from the icon of a person altogether? Would you? You mentioned that you sort of early on were just using white men. Would you sort of mix different genders and skin colors? What do you think your approach would be in that scenario?
I would try to find a way around it so that I could show a person that was representative of the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so uh, let's think. I remember doing a thing about the army, the different divisions of the army, and I
Mm-hmm.
drew a person for each thing, and it there were women in it, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think there were any black people. Um, I think it's a terrific question, um, and
Yeah, and I don't think there's a. I don't even know if there's an answer to it.
yeah, and I
Um,
certainly wouldn't abandon the idea of getting people interested by not using any imagery, but
right.
because
Okay.
that is one answer. Is just to say,
Sure. It's to just go to abstract
yeah,
shapes.
right.
Right. Right.
Um, and and I fear that some data visualization is just that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're avoiding using imagery, it's just that they don't think it's appropriate or won't help.
Right.
Um, but it is a bit of a cop out. I mean, I like pictures. People like
Right.
pictures. People,
Right. People like pictures.
right?
Right. And when you and if the goal is to help people see themselves in the data,
Yeah,
I don't know if people see themselves as a triangle,
right, right,
right,
right,
or as a circle, right?
right, right.
Um,
Maybe it's a circle. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe depends on what you had for
and
lunch. Yeah.
right,
It could be a circle.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which bit of the body is a circle?
Okay, so those are big
Yes.
topics. Let's pull
Okay.
back, because I love that we're talking about it. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was the construction of the book,
Ah,
the physical construction of the
yeah.
book, because um, like Jen Christensen book,
Hmm.
who was on a few weeks ago
Yep.
to the show, she designed her own book. This book, you designed. Just the feel of the book is very different. And I'm going to give folks a little bit of a. I mean, it's only an Easter egg if you don't have the book, but there is, starting on page. I mean, this is like one of my favorite parts. On page, I think it's 99. I'm flipping in here.
Okay.
On page 99, you have this discussion about Olympic icons.
Right.
At the very bottom of the page, there's this little blue figure
Yep.
that looks like it's running, and then you write in like smaller text at the bottom
Yeah.
in blue, you say, I think I'll go for a run myself, mustn't forget to exercise. And then if you flip the pages
Right.
quickly for the next like 70 pages, there's a little
Yeah.
running Nigel
Yeah.
Holmes, although I don't think there are glasses on
No.
the
No.
figurine. But and then at the very end, where is it? At the very end, like 80 pages later, the figure is lying on the ground, and you write, "Okay, that's enough." So that's the little Easter egg for folks who
Yeah.
don't have the book.
Yeah.
Those 80 pages, those little figurines. So
Yeah.
yeah. So what was? Why did you let's start the
Okay.
beginning, because a lot of books in this particular publisher, as I know, you could have just sent your Word document
Yep.
over and said, go ahead, lay it out
Yep.
and let me take a look, and then they would publish it. But
Yep.
you took a different path. So what was that decision like, and how did that all work out?
Well, I've written quite a number of books, and
Right.
some of them were designed by the publisher, the early ones, with collaboration, of course. And then there were a couple that I did for Lonely Planet and one for Taschen, which were completely designed by myself, and they were more like big magazines in a way. They were just one spread and then another spread, and nothing
Right.
linked on more than that. So this one, I thought, I'll actually just write the book and send it to them. They offered to
Right.
design it. So
Right.
I started to write that. And then they came back and they said, well, we've got the text, we like it, but we need to know where the pictures are actually going to go that you're talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
just stick them into the Word thing and into the Word document. And first of all, I had trouble actually importing things
Doing
into
that. Yeah.
Word and getting them.
Yeah.
And I just thought, wait a minute, this is not going to work at all, because I'm now going to have to write a complete kind of how to design it book with
Yeah.
this has got to be bigger than this one. This one links to this one. This is a series of 3 little ones, even though I'm sending them
Mm-hmm.
JPEGs that are all, this size.
Yeah.
And so I, so Alberto actually said, the way I do it is to write and design all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was ahead of him because I'd written a lot of it, but I thought, okay, how do you do that? The answer is InDesign. And
Yeah.
I had no idea how to use InDesign. I told the publisher, who was expecting the book in about a month when I told him this,
Right.
Elliot at CRC Press. And I said, so I'm going to teach myself InDesign, but I need longer to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't seem to bat an eyelid. He just said, "Oh, sure, take longer."
Right.
So
Well, I mean, you're doing all the work that they were going to have to
yes,
do, right? So
exactly,
yeah. Yeah.
yes. It crossed my mind that I should have asked for more money to begin with. As you know, John, there is absolutely no money in books at all.
Nobody in books.
But unless you're Alberto,
Nope.
I think Alberto
Right.
actually does make money. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I started with InDesign, and I realized I loved it. And it did all sorts of things. No, it didn't. I made it do things.
Right.
This is key. It's key.
Yeah.
I used none of the templates they gave me. Nothing. I said, this is what I want it to do, and
Mm-hmm.
struggled a bit. But there are 1 or 2 things that I would change, and there are some little kind of style things that I should have ironed out a bit more. But by and large, that enabled me to make the book much more friendly, because I could
Yeah.
put the pictures where I wanted them. They could be the size. I could refer to them. If it happened to be on the next page, I could say, turn the page or something,
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
But I think, as you had mentioned to me earlier, they're a textbook publisher. They wanted figures, numbers.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I hated that idea. And right at the
Yeah.
beginning, I had said, I know you're a textbook publisher, but I'm not going to write you a textbook. Um, so do you still want me to do it? And and
Yeah.
and they said, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think which was just Alberto pushing them to say yes, it's
Yeah.
worth doing. But I didn't want that, and so in the end, yeah, every page, and so I was able to put that little running person in, which I'm sure I wouldn't have been
Hmm.
able to before, and
Right.
control. And actually, there's a chapter in the middle with a blank page, and I not a blank page, a blue page. He's
Hmm.
not on the blue page, I see, but but anyway, and I did the cover, and
But
they
I,
were very good. They were terrific
yeah,
people to work with
yeah,
once
yeah,
once the rules were. So,
right.
yep.
But I would guess that a lot of people listening to this are surprised that you didn't know InDesign.
Oh, I don't know anything. Oh no, 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 no. I'm not going to confess everything, John, here in front of your public, but I
Right.
know I am a computer illiterate. I am. I could not work without it,
Right.
and
Right.
I
Right.
could not be an independent person without it. It's my typesetter, it's my courier, it's all of
Hmm.
which I needed before.
Right.
When I
But you do the
yes.
illustrations outside, like analog world.
Well, no, I use freehand. I use a
Right.
program
Oh, okay.
called
Right.
freehand for
Right.
the illustrations. But no, I start analog. Absolutely, yes, yes.
Hmm.
Drawing is very important. Sketching and
Right.
drawing, and then scanning that, and then
Hmm.
bringing it into this old program called freehand, which anybody who is under well, I don't know what age, or over what age, or no, under what age,
Yeah.
will not even have heard of. It was bought by Adobe in, I don't know, 20 years ago, I think 20 years
Hmm.
ago, and they killed it because it's a better
Mm.
program and
Right.
it's much more intuitive, and I just stuck with it. And
Yeah.
I have to use a completely different computer because it won't run on Mac and anything that's 10 or up or whatever. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
12 now, and so I have a completely different setup over there. And I
Oh,
have a
interesting.
chair on wheels, and I go like this, and I work over here, and then I come back with my little zip drive, and
Right. So you plug that
I,
in.
I
Yeah.
plug that in, and there it is for me to put into
Wow.
the book.
Yeah.
So but by the way, I find that very useful. The 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 fact that you can do something really quickly isn't necessarily good. I
Hmm.
like being able to take my time over here and then literally physically put it on a different piece of medium of thumb drive, stick it into
Right.
this computer, and that little um, kind of breathing space makes me see the thing new again.
Hmm.
Um, and if I was able just to very quickly, if I was using Illustrator, which I of course could do on this system, I would,
Sure.
I think I would miss things. I think I
Yeah.
would, I like the time that it
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
makes me
You'd
take.
lose the
Yeah,
pause. Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, it's a great book. A lot of the data viz books that come my way, I kind of scan or, maybe don't even read. And this one, I sat down and read cover to cover. Even some of them, there's one in here about how aspirin works. There's one in here about I remember this one
Yes,
from years
yes,
ago. You presented the one on why you love
yes,
cheese. I saw you present that one.
yeah.
So there's just an amazing amount of detail in here, and I hope folks will get it. It's a great book. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, John.
So Nigel, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate
Well, thank you, thank you. I enjoyed talking to you again.
it. Thanks, Nigel. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
all right. Bye.
And thanks everyone for tuning into this week's episode of the show and the entire season of the Policy of This podcast. We've had a lot of great guests on the show, talked about a lot of fantastic work going on around the world in data visualization, presentation skills, AI, and just so much more. I'm going to take a couple months off from publishing episodes of the show, so I hope that will give you a chance to catch up. And I hope you'll also take some time over the summer to rest and relax and recharge. So until next time, which will be September, until next time, this has been the Policy of His podcast. Thanks so much for listening.